beard thing, I've gotten a few comments on it this morning. We'll leave it at that. It's just laziness. I mean, 11 days. I was like, I wasn't gonna shave. Last time I shaved was 2 Wednesdays ago. So I didn't comb my hair when we were down there. I just put a hat on when we went somewhere. I didn't care. Now, laziness and orneriness have gotten me in trouble over the years. Don't look at him that way. So before we got married, this has nothing to do with the sermon. Before we got married, I decided to be ornery because Tony had always told me she didn't like facial hair. So we didn't see each other for a week or two, so I had just let the scruff grow, and finally she wouldn't say anything about it, so I went over to her house one evening after I got off work. I had a razor and a can of shaving cream. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to shave this thing off. You said you don't like it." "Well, now I kind of like it." Next thing I know, we're getting married, and I got a goatee in our wedding pictures, and it was a lot blacker then, so was my hair. So anyway, orneriness tends to get me in trouble, but anyway. So like I said, last week we were in Nashville. We took Jordan over there for a camp that she goes to, and we just decided to stay and relax and I read a book that I've been waiting to read, got started on another one. Didn't really do a whole lot. We drove around, saw some sights. But we did go shopping. Now, when we lived down near Branson, it never made sense to me why people would go on vacation and then go to the mall to shop. And yet that's what we did. We went to Nashville and went and found these little strip malls and went shopping. Now, I went and looked at a couple woodworking stores that we don't have anywhere around us here, but that doesn't count. But what we did, one of the things we did, I tried to do some boot shopping. So I kept the beard this morning as an object lesson for the kids. Dressed differently because some of y'all have noted my boots aren't in the best shape. They're comfortable. They're as comfortable as my tennis shoes. I mean, I like them. But they're not in the best shape. I've had them for a while. They're broke in. But I tried to do some boot shopping. I didn't really find anything that I was willing to spend money on there. Most of what I looked at looked all the same whenever you have your jeans leg, your pant leg down over them. I never understood all the fancy stitching that's up on the upper part. I don't get it. I mean, now I could really embarrass my daughter and go around with my pant leg tucked into my boots to show off any fancy stitching, but she's kind of gotten used to the fact that I try to embarrass her. She doesn't care anymore. Or at least she says she does. But that got me thinking, which is admittedly a dangerous endeavor. All right? How many of you this morning are wearing boots, cowboy boots? She's not. She always is, but she's not. How many were? You got boots on, you got boots, Sam's got boots. So we wear them pretty often. I did a little bit of digging on the history of cowboy boots. As with other parts of cowboy attire from history, the boot has changed. It's undergone a good deal of change over time to what we see today. See, it was originally about protection. It was really about function and preparedness for the task at hand. And no one knows really for sure just how it came to the shape that we have today, how that particular design came about. Some say the roots go back to European immigrants and what they had on their feet when they came over. Others say that the design kind of evolved from cavalry boots. Others say that the design of kind of the modern cowboy boot came about from a boot maker in Kansas. It doesn't really matter. We just don't know 100% for sure. The basics of it was just a sturdy leather boot that had much more to do with function than fashion. Cowboy had hard work to do, and he needed, just like most other professions, he needed proper footwear. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do, you want proper footwear. When Tony was working in the hospital as a nurse, I mean, she wanted proper footwear. She wanted something that was going to keep her foot cushioned through the whole shift, the whole 12-hour shift. If you're working on a job site, oftentimes you want something with steel toes to protect, because you never know what your buddy isn't paying attention to and drops something on your foot. Those kind of things. They needed proper footwear. So somewhere in the mid-1800s, this high on the leg leather boot, protected from brush, protected rubbing against cattle, rubbing against the stirrup leather, of course protected from snakes. Oftentimes those boots went all the way up to the knee. And the early boots probably had a rounded off or a squared off toe. Pointed toes, oftentimes people think, well, that was how they were designed to help a cowboy slip his foot into the stirrup. Well, there's no historical data to back that up. In fact, historically, pointed toe boots are much, much more difficult to make than a rounded toe or a squared toe boot. And the boot makers back then, they're having to crank these things out, because remember, they don't have the automation that we have today. They're having to crank these things out as fast as they can. The heel reflected the type of work that was being done. A 2 to 2.5 inch underslung heel was great for riding, kept the foot well positioned in the stirrup. A lower heel, better for groundwork. And when you get to the 20s and 30s, the 1920s and 30s, belts, vests, and boots began to undergo changes to kind of more of the design that we see today. A lot of it had to do with Hollywood. They heavily influenced this. They had this Hollywood role of a cowboy, and many believe that the way that Tom Mix dressed influenced what we even still have today, with different leathers, different stitching patterns, all that stuff for fashion. So what does talking about cowboy boots have to do with anything on a Sunday morning? How does any of this fit in or make sense for a sermon? Well, I'm glad you asked. The cowboy boot was not developed, like I said, for style. It was developed for practicality and function, and in many cases it's become stylish, but it all had to do with being well prepared. Keeping one's feet well prepared for the task at hand. As believers, as Christians, we too are instructed in the Bible to be prepared and to have our feet prepared for the task at hand. I'm going to read one verse this morning out of Ephesians. If you'll stand with me while I read this, it's really just part of a sentence. Paul writes, "And your feet sandaled with readiness for the gospel of peace." Father, thank you for the time again that we have here this morning. God, I pray that you would help me to be clear in what you have given me to communicate. Father, I just pray now that as we talk about our feet being prepared for the work that you've called us to, God, that you would speak into our hearts. God, that you would open our eyes to that which you would have us to learn. In Christ I pray. Amen. Be seated. So this verse lands kind of right in the middle of Paul describing, he's going through this list of the full armor of God. Okay, he's talking about, he's written prior to this verse about being ready to fight a battle. A spiritual battle, but being ready to fight a battle. And he uses imagery here that his readers are going to be familiar with. I mean, just like, so he's talking about this Roman armor, essentially, describing that as his readers would understand, that it's something that they would see. Just like we would understand if a modern day writer were describing certain parts of a soldier's uniform, or if you go to the big city, if he were describing the kind of suit that a businessman would wear, the different parts of that. And so, he uses this imagery to get his point across about being prepared for the spiritual battles that all believers are going to face. See, he understood that his description, they would instinctively understand. And so the Roman soldiers oftentimes would wear sandals, but then they also wore a kind of a half boot. It was called a caliga. I don't know if I don't know where the emphasis on which syllable that's supposed to be, but that my wife's shaking her head on that one. She hates it when I do that. They wore this other type of half boot, and it was good for walking on these long marches. And it had the ability to put these hobnail through the sole or on the sole to where they could get really good traction. And that came into play whenever they waded into battle. Nobody was going to push them back. Whenever you look historically at the Roman phalanx, that they would lock arms, they would lock shields together, but then they've got these nails essentially on the bottom of their boots, and whenever they can kind of dig in, nobody's going to push them back. And so Paul has this description here about proper footing, being prepared. And his point here in reference to the feet is just that simple. Get your feet ready. Just as the cowboy boot was purpose-built for the role of one working cattle, particularly from horseback, the practicality of what Paul is describing here calls for us to be prepared. Now, some of us are a little tender-footed. I mean, I like being barefoot. I like walking in mud barefoot. That just grosses my wife out. I like walking barefoot in the grass when I know there hadn't been any dogs around. But I like being barefoot. But I'm a little tender-footed. I can't walk across gravel or run across gravel barefoot. I know people that they can go trotting across gravel barefoot like it's nothing. I don't know how they do it. I need protection for my feet. But I also need something on my feet that's designed to assist me in whatever I'm doing. You see, I don't go play basketball, and I could put a period right there, but I don't go play basketball. But if I were going to go play basketball, I wouldn't go out in my Sunday morning dress shoes to play basketball. If I were to go for a hike out in the woods, I'm not going to go up and down a mountain in running shoes, because that's not the right footwear for what I need to do. It doesn't prepare me for what I might encounter. Companies spend oodles of resources designing footwear for specific purposes. And Paul says, you're going to be in a battle. You need to have those things with you that are going to prepare you for what you're going to face, and that includes what you put on your feet. And he doesn't tell us what kind of footwear to put on, rather he describes the footwear as the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. See, there's preparedness that we have when we literally wear the gospel. A readiness that comes for whatever comes our way, whatever we face, we're ready for it. We can stand firmly in the gospel, on the gospel. There is peace in knowing that you're on solid footing. You see, there's a practicality to the gospel. The gospel gives us that solid footing and a steady footing in a world that is so unsteady around us. You can't deny that things change at a rapid pace around us. And I mean, really they always have, but now it just seems to be that much more. You don't know who to trust. You don't know what to trust. You don't know what's true. You don't know who to believe, what to believe. But the gospel is always the same. You can hold on to it. You can stand firmly on it and know that you are firmly rooted in it because it does not change. The gospel gives us stability where we have instability all around us. You ever get scared and kind of lose your footing? Or see somebody get scared and they start backing up and they lose their footing and they fall. You see, the gospel gives us the peace that we need and that underpinning that we need to live without fear. To live lives that are focused on heavenly things and not the earthly things around us. See, it's easy to get afraid of what's going on all around us in the world, but when we stand firmly with our feet planted in the gospel, we don't have to fear all those things around us because we're not looking at all those things around. We see them, we know what's going on, but our focus is heavenward because that's what Jesus has called us to. You see, so much in life comes down to footwork. You know, I love sports. You all know that. And whenever you watch a sporting event, it's amazing how often they talk about footwork. And I mean, when you get into college and professional ranks, there are some people that they design footwear. It's like, okay, here's the shoes that a lineman will wear playing football. Here's the shoes that a running back's going to wear. Here's the shoes that a quarterback's going to. I mean, we weren't that high tech. We just needed a pair of shoes on our feet. But now things have changed so much, and it's an athlete's footwork is credited often with his success or failure. Watch an offensive lineman, and if he's really good, they'll talk about his footwork. If he gets beat, they'll talk about his bad footwork. Watch a shortstop playing baseball. If he's really smooth and gets to the ball really well, they'll talk about his footwork. If he messes something up, if he makes an error, oftentimes they'll talk about his footwork being out of sync. Go to a rodeo and watch. It doesn't matter what event that you have, there is footwork involved, all the way to the clowns that are trying to protect that cowboy that just got launched off of a bull. I mean, there's footwork involved with them not just protecting him, but protecting themselves. It's not just about running around being crazy, although I think they are crazy. That's a different subject. Really, any physical activity you have relies on proper footwork, which goes back to the proper preparation of your feet. The gospel gives us that foundation, that footwork, so to speak, that properly positions us for the work of God, both inside the church and outside of the church. Spiritually, when you and I put our feet into the gospel as if we were pulling on a pair of boots, we find that peace, that comfort that comes from Christ. We know that we have that firm foundation to stand on when Satan's attacks come our way. Sometimes others may attack our position or our beliefs in the Bible. They're going to. Having our feet shod with the readiness of the gospel of peace helps us remain firm in our convictions. Somebody comes at you and they don't they don't like what you have to say. They think that you're intolerant, that you're bigoted, that you're uncaring, or you're unloving. Having your feet prepared with the peace that comes from the righteousness of Christ helps you not just withstand those, but also know how to respond or not respond in the moment. When you take a stand, somebody's going to come against you. But when your stand is biblically sound, you can have that peace that comes with resting in the truth of the gospel. And one day it may happen here. One day, somebody may not like what this church stands for. One day, somebody may not like me standing up here and saying Jesus is the only way. What will we do then? What will I do then? What will you do then? Will you stand? Will you be firmly planted because you've prepared your feet in advance in the righteousness of the peace of the gospel? You see, Paul's telling his original readers, and he's telling us today that we have to prepare ahead of time. You can't expect to make the right decision in the heat of the moment if you haven't prepared ahead of time. That's why he goes through that whole list of putting on the whole armor of God, and he gets to the part about putting your feet, how does he say it again? Your feet sandaled with the readiness of the gospel of peace. Getting ready means doing things in advance, understanding in advance what may come. But there's another meaning here for having our feet prepared. Like I said, today many people wear cowboy boots just out of fashion. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Different colored leathers. Gracia was telling me about a pair of boots she just found. I'm not going to describe them. I wouldn't wear them, but I'm not going to describe them. That's great. I make fun of it, but I really don't care. Everybody's got their fashion. That's fine. But there's all the exotic skins, the expensive boots, things that you wouldn't dare wear while riding a horse or working cattle. You're just not going to. I remember whenever when snakeskin boots. Dad had a couple pair of snakeskin boots, and I remember, man, they were just the most popular. Now, I hate snakes. I hate snakes. And the last thing I wanted to do when we would go boot shopping, I was not going to look at snakeskin boots. I did not want to look down and see a snake wrapped around my feet. That just wasn't going to happen. I might have cut my foot off. I might have shot myself in the foot. I don't know what was going to happen. I didn't like the idea of it. But people wanted the fancy stitching, adorning various parts of the boot, but having no functional purpose. But our purpose as Christians isn't to be fashionable. It's about function. And that function is to take the good news of Jesus wherever we go. You see, the functionality of preparing our feet doesn't just give us the solid footing to stand on when somebody comes against us. The preparing our feet prepares us to take the gospel to the world. You see, when we look back at the function of the footwear in Ephesians, we get the idea Paul really didn't care what the footwear looked like. It all pretty much looked the same back then, but he really didn't care. Nobody cared if it was a good-looking boot or if some ugly old things like these. Functionality was the key. You see, our feet, even these ugly old wore-out, broken, really comfortable boots, become beautiful when they carry me to take the gospel to somebody else. You see, Paul is looking back, and in Romans he refers back to Isaiah where he says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. You see, he doesn't care what your physical feet look like. Your toes are all mangled, your boots are wore out. He doesn't care. He says, you've got beautiful feet when you take the gospel to somebody else. Doesn't matter if they're snakeskin boots, if they're some exotic skin, if they're wore out, if they just came in from the barn with all kinds of, we'll just leave it at barn stuff on them. It doesn't matter. They're beautiful when you have prepared them and you take the gospel to somebody else. The key is the message that we carry. So where are you today? Maybe sitting there thinking, I never thought I'd hear a sermon about boots. That's okay. If that's the strangest thing you ever hear from me, then we're probably doing all right. I promise you it won't be the strangest thing you ever hear from me. But where are you today? Are your feet ready for that battle that's ahead? Are your feet ready for the battle that you're in right now? You see, I don't know what all goes on in your daily lives, and that's okay. But some of y'all may be in a battle, a spiritual battle with folks, with things going on around you that you need to prepare your feet with the gospel of peace, to be ready to stand firmly in the truth of Jesus Christ. Maybe you're not in that battle right now, but do you need to take this time because you're not in that battle to say, now I need to be prepared. I need to be prepared. And we can look back at the whole armor of God and we can go through that sometime. But today, are your feet ready for action? Are your feet beautiful? Not simply the look of your footwear, but are you carrying the gospel to those around you? I don't know what kind of decision you may need to make, what kind of response you have to a message about boots. But this morning, we're going to move into a time of invitation. I'm going to sing hymn number 182, I think that says, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. I'll be down here. If God has spoken to you in some way, and you just need to say, Pastor, here's what I think God's telling me. I'll be down here. Be glad to pray with you. This is the time to respond to what God is doing in your life. Father, in this time, may you have the freedom to move in our lives, God, as we respond to what you have told us to do. In Christ I pray. Amen. Would you stand with us, please?